Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel. I do hope that you're exceedingly well, and so much love to each and every one of you. You're all very special, so I do hope you're doing remarkably well. Don't forget to go and get yourself a lovely hot cup of cocoa, whatever it is that you drink, because I've got a sensational story for you tonight that you're just going to love. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Keith and I'm from North Carolina, which is the 9th largest state in the United States and is twice the size of Ireland. Believe it or not, it could literally fit into Texas about 5 times. North Carolina is divided into 100 counties. It extends from the coastal plains to the Piedmont and Appalachian Mountains. The exquisite Blue Ridge Mountains cover most of the western part of North Carolina, including Asheville, extending from Georgia to Pennsylvania. We are also home to the Great Smoky National Park, and we have 41 other state parks, 10 national parks, and 4 national forests here, and the scenic beauty in this part of the world is outstandingly exquisite. I was born and raised in western North Carolina, in Haywood County, in a small town called Waynesville, which is southwest of Asheville and is situated between the Great Smoky and Blue Ridge Mountains. I really love the charming town and have always done so since I was a little boy. It has a quintessential old town feel about it, along with the most marvellous eateries, coffee bars, ice cream parlours and so much more. Waynesville has a thriving tourism industry, and so many of the locals appropriate a living from its rich fruits. I gather it's been voted the best mountain town in North America time and time again, and frankly, I'm not surprised about that. I grew up amidst the idyllic serenity and resplendent majesty of the Blue Ridge Mountains, where we lived in a quaint, rustic, rather dreamy-looking wooden cabin that would not have looked out of place on a box of Swiss chocolates. For indeed, the mountainous scenery that surrounded our home was equally as magical and enchanting as the breathtaking view seen by so many viewers on the epic, legendary movie The Sound of Music, where you see the singing nun, Maria, dancing joyfully down the undulating green hills, dotted with whimsical, delicate wild flowers, singing the hills are alive with the sound of music. For it would seem that the daily panoramic views that my eyes beheld every single morning were not dissimilar. Our resting wooden cabin was nestled in a glorious treed oasis, surrounded by sublime panoramic mountain views, rugged outcrops, meandering streams, dreamy forests, silvery creeks, and rolling valleys of green turf that were dotted with pretty wild flowers in early spring. Growing up, I was incredibly blessed to be raised in a congenial, fun-loving family home, with 2 delightful sisters and 2 devoted parents. I must say at the time I was obliviously unaware of what a privilege it was for me living in such close quarters to the natural world, as I had boundless access to the great outdoors, with marvellous camping holidays, fishing excursions, hiking adventures, horse riding, mountain biking and ATV opportunities, and so much more. I'm afraid for a very long time I took all this for granted, not appreciating how incredibly lucky I was to live in this extraordinary place, with the fresh mountain air blowing against my face and the easy-going pace of life here. My story that ultimately led to my incredulous Bigfoot encounter happened a long time ago in 1995, when I was about 18 years old at the time, and was really rather naive, falsely believing that I was worldly wise and invincible, as you always do when you're young. I'd always been an intrepid adventure seeker and was eager to experience life in a bustling, big, vibrant city, which was conspicuously different to my carefree lifestyle in the countryside. But I had such a hankering for something different and exciting. For an 18-year-old boy, nothing held greater appeal or enticed me more than the magnetic lure and vibrant heartbeat of the Big Apple. So it was decided that I would stay with my older cousin Barry in his New York City apartment. I was naturally eager to procure some local work in a bar or restaurant, because I wanted to live in this buzzing metropolis for a while. My parents had reluctantly agreed with this fanciful arrangement of mine before I embarked upon a degree of some kind, as at that stage of my life I was clueless as to what I wanted to become when I was older. My father thought a year or 2 off, living in New York for a while, might give me a chance to reflect on my life path and to make some decisions about my future. "It will do him no end of good," he told my mother. A little maturity behind his belt will stand him in good stead. And besides, living in a place like New York will be an eye-opening, thought-provoking experience for him, which is exactly what he needs. I never realised how right my father was, as a stint in New York did inevitably help me prioritise my life. For several weeks my cousin and I were having an amazing time, but my money was rapidly burning out, as New York was an expensive place to live. I knew I needed to pay my way and realised I had to get serious about finding work. One day as my cousin and I were out painting the town red, I was stopped at random by a very glamorous 40-year-old woman in the street, who was swathed in a fetching designer outfit, accessorised with very stylish Gucci handbags and shoes. I noted that she was even more meticulously turned out than some of Manhattan's most pampered pooches. The fashionable woman handed me her glossy business card, which was for one of New York's finest modelling agencies. "You're exactly what I'm looking for," she told me. "You're tall, dark and handsome, with a really great build. How do you feel about doing some modelling work for me?" "I'm not sure," I said. "It's not really my kind of thing." "I think it just might be," she said. "That's if you're interested, of course, in being paid very well." "How much are we talking about?" I asked, growing increasingly curious, as I was looking for work in order to stay in New York, and so any job offer that wasn't labour-intensive held a great deal of appeal for me. She scribbled down some figures on a piece of paper and handed them to me. "That's what you could potentially earn," she said, "if you work for our agency, of course. Some of my prestigious clients pay very well indeed." I looked at the figures on the paper and nearly did a double take. "Are you kidding?" I gasped. "Is this for real?" "Oh, it is," the woman said, and she smiled at my bewildered, rather dazzled expression. "I take it you're interested. It's amazing how persuasive good money can be for a fine young man like yourself. This is my address," she said, tapping her card. "I'll see you on Monday morning at 9 p.m. sharp. Don't be late. We'll prepare a portfolio for you to present to my clients, and a go-see card. I'm certain they'll love your fresh, boyish look." Before long I was being paid great money and working as a model, acquiring all kinds of assignments for various clients, from aftershave commercials to designer clothes. It was not really my thing, as I didn't enjoy posing for photographs or strutting my stuff down a catwalk. Sometimes I really did feel like a prize peacock, fanning my feathers in an attention-seeking way, which, as you can imagine, I didn't really like. Yet the money was liberating, so I could financially afford to stay in New York with my cousin. My generous income meant that we were able to acquire an even more lavish apartment for ourselves, and that was incredibly cool. And, of course, it was easy money. We also had the freedom to party, enjoying the benefits of a greater social life. With a larger wallet, it meant that my normally reticent nature was a little bolder and more assertive when it came to acquiring dates with attractive young girls. Naturally, in the modelling world, I met all kinds of quirky, eccentric and unusual characters, from your no-nonsense types to the hard-working perfectionist, the arty-farty, the dramatic, the downright mad-as-a-hatter type, and for me personally, it was a colourful experience. My story rarely began as a consequence of my friendship with a gay photographer called Anton that the ladies just loved, as he was charismatic, dramatic and in-your-face kind of person. I noticed he practically called everyone "my darling." I discerned that he was gregarious, charming and expressive. He was a kind of character that was predisposed to waving his arms effusively in very expressive, effeminate gestures. He loved his audience of adoring fans, of which he had many, and he would fill you in on all the gripping, explicit details of his incredulous, tempestuous love life, which all the ladies absolutely loved. Without fail, he was always greeted by a captive audience that hung on to his every single word. I don't think he realised how hilarious he was, as even his facial expressions would have most people roaring out with laughter. He was comical, to say the least, without even trying to be. Anton wore his artificial white hair in a spunked-up, spiky hedgehog style that was very trendy at the time. I recall he told me on countless occasions that he got through a whole jar of hair gel in just 3 days in order to create this dazzling effect. "The trouble is," he said, "to look this good it costs me an arm and a leg." Anton had attractive blue eyes, framed by naturally long lashes, And he was tall and lanky, always wearing very zooty-looking zipper turtlenecks, along with tight pairs of black jeans. I noticed he was impeccably groomed and always exceedingly fashionable, with a dashing sense of style and pizzazz. I know that Annette, who ran the modelling agency, loved him to death because his quirky eccentricities made him unique and very lovable as far as she was concerned. "Darling," she would say, "what do you think of this outfit I'm wearing? I know I can get an honest opinion from you." And she most certainly could, for there were occasions he would tell her she looked hideous. Anton literally told you exactly what he thought, without ever packing any punches. "Oh, sweetheart, you look so dishy and yummy dressed like that. If I wasn't gay, I'd be drooling all over you like a dog over a fillet steak. My darling, you look smoking hot," he would say, gushingly kissing her on both cheeks. You could tell Annette was tickled pink when Anton doled out the compliments like a box of candies. Anton was unrestrained in his effusive and effervescent gushing displays of enthusiastic elucidation, and this was why people loved him so very much. One day he came into the agency looking very sorry for himself, rather like a dog with its tail between his legs, and his normally proud head was hanging very low, with his eyes focused on the ground. You could tell he looked a little like a balloon that had been deflated, as his expression was really rather pitiful. He informed everyone that his romantic relationship and love affair with his partner Caden had fizzled out and soured significantly, and it was now all over. Everybody gasped. "Over? Are you sure?" "Very sure," said Anton. "Never been more sure about anything in my life." I remember he'd been recruited to take some photographs of me for a glossy magazine that day, but when Annette heard about his plight, she raced into his arms to comfort him, and the shoot was long since forgotten and abandoned. It would seem that Anton's emotional state took precedence over any pressing work assignment, as far as Annette was concerned. "My poor, poor darling," she said. "What happened?" "Well, I've had just about enough of that god-awful, conceited, patronising Caden," he said, "and I feel on top of the world about it. I should have ended things a long time ago." I knew, of course, he was talking about his long, turbulent relationship with the pompous photographer whom he'd been dating. It would seem his lover created photographic portfolios for a rival modelling agency. I'd never ever liked him much. He fancied himself far too much. He made no secret of the fact that he believed himself to be the finest photographer in the business. I'd often wondered why such an incongruous pair had ever got together, as they were as different as chalk and cheese. "I've always been a natural artist," Caden had boasted to me once. "I know how to create perfect lighting effects and mood, and I've won awards for my photography." I remember joking, "Well, you've certainly not won any notable awards for your humility and modesty," I said. "Well, why should I hide my light under a bushel?" he said, swaggering off. And so it was we were to learn all the intricate details of Anton's love life, for he delighted in reenacting the dramatic events, almost as if he was on a Broadway show. "This time Caden's gone too far," chided Anton. "I've had enough of Caden's inflated ego and the way he keeps undermining my work. He makes absolutely no secret of the fact that he thinks he's a superior photographic artist to me, which is a hell of a cheek if you ask me." "Of course it is," agreed Annette. "It's a dreadful cheek." Anton continued, "There is a point in time when it hits you like a brick in the head, and that's when you realise you should not be living with someone who tirelessly puts you down. He had the brass-necked audacity to tell me in no uncertain terms that my photographic shots for the competition are insipid and uninspiring compared to his unrivalled, ingenious, innovative work. He actually believes that his photographic portfolio for the competition will win him first prize, and he told me that I didn't stand a chance of winning anything because my work is so passé. "You are joking," I said. "No, I'm not," chided Anton. "He thinks he can critique my work in such a derogatory, insulting way, and I'm just going to grin and take it. And he thinks that undermining me is not going to jeopardise our relationship at all. I mean, what is he actually smoking? Relationships are built on giving, not taking all the time." He continued, "I woke up this morning and took one look at Caden, and I asked myself, Anton, what the heck did you ever see in him? Even to look at, the dude is about as bland and mediocre as a piece of boiled chicken, and he's about as riveting and interesting as a plate of steamed rice. He's got no pizzazz or any punch. Everything about him is beige." But I thought that you thought he was the most exciting person that you'd ever met, I reminded him. Please, scoffed Anton, waving his arms around in a gesture of defiance. When did I ever say that? Well, you must have a short memory, I told him. I recall you clearly saying that he was hot stuff. Well, if that's the case, I must have had my blinkers on, because believe me, that dude is as dull as a drain pipe. So when did you tell him it was all over, I asked. This morning, said Anton stiffly. I told him to pack his things and leave at once. I told him I wanted him gone from my apartment when I got back, and never ever to see him again, as long as I live. Well, what did he say to that? He said that he was glad that I had ended it all, because he never fancied me anyway, and that our relationship was not authentic. He also affirmed that he looked forward to getting the contract with the designer company and winning that photographic competition. He says he can't wait to see me fall flat on my face when he's announced the winner, and I can see he was smirking at me. The nerve of it, said Annette, shaking her head in disgust. That man has an ego the size of Manhattan. He needs bringing down to size. What exactly is this photographic contract and competition that you're talking about? I asked Anton. Well, it's a designer company that's looking for an innovative photographer to promote their line of outdoor fashion, and I think my pictures are pretty damn good, let me tell you. I've produced a whole portfolio which I'll be entering into the competition pronto, and I think I stand a good chance of winning, irrespective of what that dude says. Where did you take your photographs for the portfolio? I asked. Well, in the studio, of course. Where else? Really, I said, raising a sceptical eyebrow. Surely if you're promoting an outdoor range of clothes, you should be taking pictures of models in the great outdoors against vibrant, awe-inspiring scenes of the natural world. Well, that's what I would do. I never thought of that, said Anton, growing rather excited. That's actually quite a good idea. Before long, I'd persuaded Anton and another male model, including the makeup artist, to come to my hometown, as I knew a number of amazing locations where we could take some incredible shots of the natural world, from rugged outcrops to waterfalls, streams, hills and forests. Just wait, said Anton. Wait until I wipe the smile off Caden's face and win that prize. Everything is at stake now, as winning this prize is not just about getting that photographic contract, but it's about bringing down that little turd from his high pedestal and making him realise just how small he really is. And so it was that Anton, the makeup artist, and Christopher, the model, all visited my hometown together. I'd invited them to stay at my family wooden cabin, but they had insisted on staying at a local hotel, which I could actually understand, as Anton was so particular about everything, like the Egyptian cotton sheets on his bed, and the way he liked his steak cooked. I knew it was a huge adjustment to leave the Big Apple and visit a small little mountain town, but he was determined to outshine Caden at any cost, even if it meant breaking out of his comfort zone and getting his designer clothes snagged on barbs and covered in mud, which was more than likely to happen on one of our outdoor escapades. It was good to get home and see my family again, but the next day I had to decide upon where to take Anton for the photographic sessions. Well, why don't you take him to the waterfall in the Sylvan, my mother suggested. Some of those rocky boulders are natural works of art in their own right. And as for that waterfall, it's out of this world. A backdrop like that would most certainly give him an advantage of winning that competition, if you ask me. The following morning I met Anton, who was still wearing his white bathrobe when I arrived to pick him up for the photo shoot. He was in no hurry to get started and was promptly ordering himself a champagne breakfast with smoked salmon, caviar and scrambled eggs. He was being waited on hand and foot by the hotel staff there, who were seemingly delighted to do his every bidding, and I could see why. Anton was waving around generous dollar notes as tips for them. I noted how good he looked in his lavish, opulent-looking hotel room, as he seemed so at home in the lap of luxury. Christopher and I were going to model this vast range of very stylish outdoor clothes from the designer company. The makeup artist worked on our faces to brighten our skins, creating a very natural look. Soon we left the hotel, and armed with a large suitcase of very zooty, stylish designer clothes we could change into, along with Anton's cameras, of course, we finally left the quaint little town behind us and drove into the heart of the remote, rambling countryside, where we took several turnings down some rocky, rather precarious roads, while I directed the way, as I knew the area around here like the back of my hand. I could tell by Anton's expression that he'd never driven down roads that caused the car to wobble and jolt like this before, and despite my very best efforts to persuade him to wear something more practical for the great outdoors, Anton was dressed to the nines in his meticulous designer gear. I knew that I could not persuade him otherwise, and so I didn't even try. I had become all too well aware of the eccentricities from the quirky, unconventional characters that I had encountered in the modelling world, and I knew better than to try and challenge them. Anton was an incredible artist with a keen eye for beauty, and I do believe I actually heard him gasp as we walked through the Sylvan. I can't say I was surprised. He was in awe of the scenery and completely transfixed and mesmerised by it. "Oh my word," he kept saying, "this place is so idyllic, it's so magical, it's a dream. I can't believe places like this actually exist." I remember feeling incredibly proud, rather like a mother hen over her chicklets. I realised I was very prideful of my hometown, along with all the exquisite scenery that she boasted. Indeed, the Sylvan was absolutely spectacular. There are no words to describe it. It was full of statuesque birch trees with their distinguishable pronounced white bark, along with 300-year-old red maple trees that are a sight to behold, as well as western hemlocks, dogwoods and oaks, and some of the trees with their voluptuous shapely trunks were carpeted in rich velvety green moss. The light from the shaded forest canopy danced through the branches with a subtle luminosity, enhancing the tranquil ambience of this breathtaking place. The steep, rugged, rocky mountain ground was lined with hiking trails and sculptural-looking boulders that were gloriously swathed in Spanish moss, while the brush consisted of sweeping ferns, thyme, sweet woodruff, and so much more. I think the three of us felt as if we'd been transported to a magical, mesmerising treed oasis where the sounds of the pretty birdsong literally serenaded us. We spotted a couple of cotton-tailed rabbits bobbing around and several squirrels darting up trees, eyeing us with wide, curious eyes. Before long we could hear the sounds of the waterfall cascading down the masterful, elevated rocky outcrops, and as we approached this stunning paragon of nature, I could see tears of wonder pouring down Anton's face, as he was completely beguiled and bedazzled by this verdant wonderland. "I don't think I've ever seen anything more beguiling than this place," he told me, opening up the suitcase to get out some of the clothes that we were required to model. Anton set to work, taking hundreds of photographs of us, modelling these designer clothes against dazzling scenic backdrops. And even if I say so myself, to date I have never seen more incredible fashion photographs. All of a sudden I got this overwhelming sensation that we were being watched. I could tell that Anton was feeling it too, as he kept looking around the enclave nervously. "I feel as if some creep is watching us," he finally told me. "I've been feeling it for a while now." But we all looked around and saw absolutely nothing, but were greeted only by the usual sounds of the forest. During our tea break, we decided to explore the Sylvan further, leaving our stuff by the waterfall, and that was when we discovered this large tent-like structure that was made out of timber beams, neatly stacked tightly together, and was the size of a four-man tent. This curious construction had been created meticulously with fastidious attention to detail by proficient hands, that was clear. I immediately thought that it must belong to some wild local man who lived off-grid, and my thoughts were confirmed to me when I saw the fire pit outside the timber tent, lined with large boulders and strewn with the ashy remnants of a recent fire. I peered inside the tent and saw 3 very large mattresses made up of soft grass and lined with animal pelts. I also discerned these weave baskets lying on the tent floor, overflowing with plums, apples and blueberries. "Who lives here?" asked Anton, looking at me curiously. "I've no idea," I said. "I've never seen a tent like this before. It must be some kind of a man who rebels against the town and enjoys living in nature." "Let's get back to the waterfall to continue the shoot," suggested Anton. As we approached the waterfall, we all stopped dead in our tracks, hardly daring to believe what we were perceiving. For never in my wildest imaginations would I have expected to see what I was observing now. We discerned the distinct silhouettes of 2 sizable creatures, with their backs facing away from us. My first impression was that these critters were bears, but I knew that that wasn't the case, as the critters had long, agile fingers and were squatting down on bent knees, so it was difficult to perceive exactly how big they were. I could sense the excited, inquisitive energy as the critters ransacked our things, studying everything with a vibrant curiosity. All of a sudden, one of the critters stood up with effortless grace as he gripped Anton's camera, which looked like a toy, it seemed so inconspicuous and small in his huge hands. The critter turned around to face me, looking at me directly through his deep-set dark eyes, and it did not seem at all as if he was discomposed or even stressed by our presence. In that moment, I have never felt so much paralysing fear as I did just then. I was standing literally yards away from an apex predator. This critter was easily 9 foot tall, 800 pounds and 4 foot wide. He was covered with long flowing dark hair, with red, brown and blonde highlights. He was powerful, majestic, lofty and strong, so much so that I was completely intimidated and abashed by him. In that moment I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I was staring at Bigfoot himself, and I tried my level best to avoid eye contact with him, but I was seemingly locked in a trance-like state with the critter that I was powerless to escape. I wanted to run, believe me I did, for indeed I've never wanted to run so much in my entire life, but it seemed that I could not. My muscles were not operational, and I was frozen to the spot rather like a marble statue. I began to quiver in fear because my whole body began to just shake involuntarily. The critter just stood there staring at me on a continuous basis. It was like he was looking into the very depths of my soul, and I was quite afraid of what he was seeing or perceiving. I'll never forget those dark brown eyes and the intense way that he looked right through me as long as I live. The other critter who'd been ferreting through the clothes got up and turned around to look at us, and to my absolute horror he was even more bigger and daunting than the first critter. I noticed that he had tied a long pair of trouser pants around his middle, almost like a belt, which he kept glancing down at to admire with a very satisfied look on his face, as he had found something that he could wear and seemed terribly pleased about it. He kept making these happy chuckling sounds and stroking the long pants with his hands, as if marvelling at the fabric. I watched in awe as he glided over to his friend, almost as if he was floating on a cloud, as his movements were so incredibly fluid. Soon there were 2 pairs of eyes staring at us for what seemed like a perfect age, but it was possibly only a few seconds. But time has a remarkable way of lengthening quite dramatically when your life is flashing before you, and you're certain that it is about to be literally snuffed out in any given second, which is exactly what I thought. As the Bigfoot grasped the camera, he moved towards me. I was certain that I was about to be killed. I truly thought he was going to lash out at me, but instead he just handed me the camera in a nonchalant way, which I took from him. He studied me earnestly through inquisitive eyes, and then spoke in some strange words in a language that I've never ever heard before, and I wish I knew and understood what he was saying. I said nothing, and the critter repeated the words again, and I realised that it must be some kind of a question. I had no way of answering, so I just nodded my head profusely and said, "Yes, that's right." And then, as if on cue, Anton also nodded his head and said, "Yes, that's right," in unison with me. The critters looked at each other for a moment and then nodded, seemingly satisfied with our response. Then, to my amazement, they just glided away with such a seamless grace, never even glancing towards us once, but both eagerly engaged in an excitable conversation where they kept chatting away backwards and forwards to each other, and I knew that they were discussing us, the camera, and the clothes in great detail. I don't know if you've ever been to Madame Tussauds before and seen the statues there. Well, that is what the 3 of us were like as we stood frozen for several long minutes, not daring to move a muscle or even saying a word. But it was Anton who bravely broke the long silence. "What the heck were they?" he said, his voice trembling and shaking. "I think it was a Bigfoot," I said. "Well, I think they were both Bigfoots." "Let's get the hell out of here," said Anton, shaking like a leaf. "Look at my hands," he said. "Look how they're quivering. I've never been so freaked out in all my life. Did you see the size of those things? They could have eaten us for breakfast without any problems." "No, they wouldn't have," said Christopher, interjecting. "They were very nice critters and very interested in your photography. That's why they asked you if you liked taking those pictures." "They didn't ask me anything," protested Anthony. "They didn't even speak English, for goodness sake." "Well then, why did you say that's right?" protested Christopher. "You answered them." I knew he was asking a question, but I didn't know what he was actually asking, I said, looking at Christopher in amazement. How on earth did you know what they were saying? It was like I could audibly hear the words in my head without them being physically spoken. I thought you could too, by the way you answered the question. How do they even know what a camera is? I asked, looking perturbed. Christopher shrugged his shoulders. They seemed to be able to read energy, he said. They knew what the camera was. They were very excited about it. When we returned to the hotel, we discussed what we'd seen, and I realised that at least 2 of us had felt unable to run. We sensed that our fear had completely impeded our ability to move, and that we'd both felt certain that we were going to die, as we sensed these Bigfoots were indeed powerful predators. However, Christopher felt very different. He wasn't even afraid for a single moment, nor did he ever fear for his life. He said he sensed the creatures were gentle and kind, and that there was nothing to be afraid of, despite their great size. Looking back, I don't believe the critters intended to harm us at all. I believe they had observed us taking photographs during the fashion shoot, and were driven by curiosity and intrigue, which is why they examined our things when we went off for our walk. I believe the tent structure we discovered belonged to the critters, and it is clear to me that they wove those fruit baskets and are clearly capable of making a fire. I think they have human origins and ape-like DNA because they're the embodiment of those 2 DNA profiles, and I'm in no doubt that they were discerning and emotionally intelligent. Anton, who'd never heard of Bigfoot before, truly believes that even Arnold Schwarzenegger's body in his prime never compared to the awesome physiques of these masterful critters. Fast forward to several weeks, and Anton told me that he won that photographic contract with a designing company for their outdoor range of designer clothes, and at the awards ceremony they described Anton's photographs as the most beguiling and awe-inspiring photographs that they had ever seen. I cannot say that I'm at all surprised, because his scenic photography was sensational. Apparently Caden was so furious that he stormed away from the awards ceremony in a huge huff. It seemed like he'd really been brought down to size. You should have seen the expression on his face, said Anton, laughing. He was mortified he hadn't won. He couldn't believe it. I think he wanted the ground to swallow him up because he felt really small and embarrassed. Good, I said. You deserved to win that contract. Well, it was worth my while, Anton told me. Without question, encountering that critter called Bigfoot was the best and most terrifying day of my life, both at the same time. And it's down to you that I won this competition, because it was your idea in the first place. I did get a couple of pictures of Bigfoot's feet when he actually clicked the camera, he told me, but unfortunately they never came out. What a dreadful pity that was. All these years later, I'm married and still live in my hometown, and my time spent in the Big Apple really helped me to appreciate my tranquil country life, and I work here now in the manufacturing industry. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.